Where do bees live and what are their habitats? Bees live everywhere in the world. They can be found on every continent except Antarctica because it's too cold and there aren't much need for bees there anyway, because bees live in areas where flowering plants are abundant, like gardens, woodlands, orchards, meadows, and others. The bees build homes called nests on trees and even bee farms, or any other edge surfaces. There are over 20,000 species of bees. So these are some habitats of bees. This is a garden, a woodland, an orchard, and a meadow. And this is a bee farm and a bee nest, or a beehive, sorry. What do bees eat? Bees eat a sugary sweet fluid called nectar or sucrose, which flowers release to attract them, and also a powdery substance called pollen from flowers. Pollen is the male reproductive cell of a plant, so pollen is what plants use to reproduce. The bees have a really effective and efficient system of getting nectar back to everyone in the hive, especially the larvae, which are the babies or the bee offspring. In a beehive, there are specific roles for every bee, and every bee is always making sure they do their duties. The bee responsible for food are called foragers, which are the bees we usually see. They go around their flight range and collect nectar and pollen from all the flowers they can. They store the nectar in their pouch-like stomach and the pollen on baskets on their hind legs, so they can take them back to the hive. When the forager bees are all loaded up, they would return back to the hive, where they would use their special stomach to transfer the nectar mouth to mouth into another bee, which turns it into honey. Bees make honey as a way to store food for cold winters when they're unable to forage for more. The larvae will also eat the honey. Specially selected larvae will be chosen by worker bees to become a future queen. They are fed a nutritious honey secretion from the glands of the bees called royal jelly, which will allow the selected larvae to become sexually mature so she can later perform the duties of queen, which is to reproduce, because she was given the royal jelly the purpose of the queen bee is to reproduce. Because she was given the royal jelly, only the queens can reproduce, since she was specially selected for that. So here we see a bee exchanging the nectar into another bee from their stomachs. And here we see a bee secreting the royal jelly for a selected larvae, which is in this honeycomb. And here's a forager bee collecting collecting nectar from a flower. And these are pollen grains on a hibiscus flower. These little yellow thing. It's on the stigma of the hibiscus, which is also another reproductive part of the flower. What organisms prey on bees? Oh no. Bees are preyed on by lots of animals, such as small mammals like skunks, most birds, and even other insects like hive beetles. So here we have a food web showing the predators of bees. So it starts out in the hibiscus, where the bee gets the nectar from the hibiscus, and then the skunk eats the bee, or a bird eats the bee, or the hive beetle eats the bee. So these here are all the predators who prey on the bees. Bee relationships. So we know their relationships we know bees have relationships with other organisms in the ecosystem. So here are some of those, like the main ones. So competitor. Bees compete with other pollinators or animals that eat nectar and pollen, like other species of bees in the same ecosystem, like bumblebees or hummingbirds. Parasitism. A parasite called the Varroa attach themselves to bees and their larvae, eating them from the inside out. And mutualism, this is a very big one. The bee and the flower. Bees fly from flower to flower, gathering nectar, which they make into food, benefiting the bees. benefiting the bees. In this mutualistic relationship, the bees get to eat and the flowering plants get to reproduce. Since the bees go and collect the nectar and pollen, while the bees are doing that and they're going from flower to flower, they distribute the pollen into other flowers, which completes the sexual reproduction of the flower. So yeah, and that is the bees' major role in the ecosystems. Without bees, plant reproduction would be less, meaning less plants and less trees, thus less food for herbivores, thus less food for the entire ecosystem, thus less animals and less oxygen, thus global warming, thus less humans, thus the end of the world. Like Albert Einstein said, that is why they are a keystone species. Um, on a side note, less importantly, bees also make honey and royal jelly for humans to eat and use. And this is a food web that includes a bee. Here we see the bee, which is a primary consumer, consuming nectar from either the producer sunflower or the producer tulip. And we see a secondary consumer, the spider, eating the bee, or the secondary consumer, cardinal bird, eating the bee. We also see another primary consumer, the butterfly, who is a competitor to the bumblebee because they also eat the tulips. Here we see tertiary consumers. The robin eats the spider, and the crows also eat the bees. All of these are secondary consumers, which secondary consumers and predators to the bee: the spider, the robin, the cardinal, and the crow. And that concludes my presentation on bees. Something to gather here is bees are really important, like seriously important. They are in every continent in the world, and they help plants reproduce. And yeah, thank you. Bye.